Hello everybody and welcome to my set review for Gentry. Just the highlights this time. We have the full version that you can go check out by looking over here. There should be a card here if I do figure out how that thing works. If you really want to know about one specific card that I didn't mention here. First and foremost, a bit of a disclaimer. I won't be talking about known Gentry staples that get reprinted or reprints that are currently already in there. Most notable of those are the common dual lands. They come into play tapped and you gain 1 life. These are Gentry staples and they will be crazy necessary forever, I hope, because they're close to the most perfect iteration of common dual lands we have. Other things we won't be talking about are things like Shock getting reprinted or yet another version of Return to Nature, for example. We won't be talking about that. We'll be talking about cards that will improve archetypes, will spawn new archetypes, or are just genuinely interesting additions to the current meta game. So I hope you're ready for this. Let's go have a look. We will be talking about the cards not by order or this is the most impactful card or alphabetically. I grouped up some of the cards together because it makes sense to talk about them together. First up, we have Skyscanner, which is a 3-mana 1/1 artifact creature with flying that when it enters the battlefield you draw a card. Now in of itself this isn't a very impactful card, but we've seen in the past that in the right shell it can do a lot of things. Now it being an artifact makes it so that it's pretty interesting with some of the artifact synergies that we have seen from decks in the past. Both Kobe and me have tried out a mono blue artifact matter shell that might really want to see a card like this. Another card that deck might want to see is the following one we have in Chrome Replicator. If you already have a non-land, non-token permanent with the same name as one another, this is 5 mana for 2 4/4 creatures, which is nothing to scoff at. The deck pretty much struggles with getting some pressure going and is really good at quickly going through the deck, playing a lot of 4-offs, so this might be just the thing for that deck. These two cards, the Skyscanner and the Chrome Replicator, are definitely more on the iffy scale and will be more looked at by more, let's say, adventurously creative deck builders, but I wouldn't be surprised to be playing these. I know I will be trying to break them. And next up we have Swift Response as a great card to add to white-based control decks. Most creatures need to tap when they're attacking, which makes this a near unconditional removal spell at 2 mana, where before they were limited to dealing 3 or 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. Now it is just destroying it outright. It's a lot worse against blockers that need to get removed, but often control decks don't really need to worry about this. So definitely is going to see play in some of those Azorius builds that we've seen. Conclave Mentor is going to be the backbone for a new archetype, I think. +1/+1 counters matter. Already used to have a black-green buddy, which was one of the strongest counter stones of the Gentry metagame. This secondary ability of gaining life when it dies is interesting, but you have to take into account that it will often die to Cry of the Carnarium, which means there's not much life gain to be happen here. There's a lot of support cards for this as well, and we want to take a look at some of the cards that might not be that obvious, but could be pretty interesting as well. Lore Scale Quaddle here pushes you into Bond, of course, but it gives you a more mid-range option to go at where you're playing a lot of draw spells and you're trying to protect your lore skill Quattle, which is going to be extremely large. There's also the 3-drop that gives all creatures with a +1/+1 counter you control trample. That makes it really interesting if you're going for big creatures. So these, and there are more support spells for this, and a lot of hidden spells throughout the card pool currently that probably make this a very interesting and intuitive deck that has a bunch of options as far as your site boarding goes, and gives you options for personalizing that deck. Just keep Cry of the Carnarium in the back of your head, or any effect that deals 2 damage for that matter, because it's going to be one of your worst enemies. Frantic Inventory in of itself isn't so interesting in most of the tempo-oriented matchups, but I do believe that all decks that want to go long into the game do want to play this. Whether you're Dimir or Azorius control, this is a really good card. That said, Izzet might want to look at it as well, as the first one gets you that Improbable Alliance trigger in your own turn. The second one gives it in your opponent's turn without having to discard to what is it? Frilled Possibilities, Frilled Opportunities, the red, discard a card, draw 2. So this might take that slot away from it, though the possibilities do let you discard and fill up your graveyard faster if you're still playing Crackling Drake. Cat also wants to have something to say. This is my show, Cat. Finishing Blow is a new-ish tool for Dimir control players. Allows you to hit any creature or planeswalker, completely unconditional and an instant. There is Eliminate as well, which does pretty much the same but limits the converted mana cost that you can interact with. The fact that Ashiok and Narset are 2 targets that you want to really be able to hit in the mirror match, Sahili as well in some of the matches, makes this pretty interesting, as it is also a nice tempo tool. I do wonder which uncommons will get cut to make room for Eliminates, but it is definitely a very strong card. In the meantime, Luna wants attention as well. Next up, we have the block of cards that do stuff whenever you gain 3 life or more, and there are some options there. This option here, the Silver Smooth Ghoul, will give you a recurring draw engine on top of whatever else you've got going. And anyone that knows me knows that I like recurring draw engines, so I will be trying to build something around this. The fact that it has 3 power makes me hopeful that we'll get an effect that lets us sacrifice creatures and gain life equal to their power as a repeatable thing. But we'll have to see in the future. And now we have a cat. I'm just gonna leave this in. I mean, why do another take? We have a cat now. If you hear purring or the microphone move, it's because of the cat. Light of Promise is a card that could fit into the deck that aims at gaining 3 life, but I think would be better in the Ajani's Pridemate shell, and turn your Healer's Hawk into a Pridemate of its own. But just make sure that you have enough protection for it then, because this is putting eggs in one basket even more than usual. Revitalize is the card that enables all your gain 3 life trigger shenanigans, so will definitely be played in all those versions. And then we have Feet of Resistance, which will give that extra protection. We currently have God's Willing in a lot of those decks. Feet of Resistance does that and more. No, you don't scry, but the +1/+1 counter means you can rescue a bunch of things from a Cry of the Carnarium as well, which is going to be a very impactful decision. This is also common, where God's Willing was uncommon, so it will free up some slots in your deck to put more power into. Griffin Erie is, if you want to be a bit more aggressive with this strategy, probably the best card to have, as it will get you an incremental army of griffins. Getting free 2/2 flyings is nothing to scoff at. And then the card that will single-handedly spur a new archetype, Teferi's Tutelage, is going to put mill in on the map for sure. We have people that really love to try and build mill decks. Now they have their build around me cards. Furor of the Pit is one of the few tools that good mono red decks are getting, though again it is putting more eggs in that one basket. You put it on your own creature, you attack for 2 extra each turn, and there is some corner case play where you're putting it on your opponent's defender, forcing them to attack so you clear the path for your attackers. We move over to ramp and heavy green spells. They're getting Track Down, which pretty much is Ponder. For green, you get to scry 3, so that's shuffling around the top of your deck. You get to reveal the top card after you've scryed. If that is a creature or land, you get to draw that card. So you can still set up so that the card below it is the non-creature, non-land you might want for next turn. Very interesting card for those green decks to have. Another one is LAN Visionary. Though it does die to Cry of the Carnarium, it will have replaced itself already and is a great card at putting pressure on your opponent, while if you do get to untap with it, gain extra advantage from it. Ranger's Guile, super important card. Can't underestimate what this card will do. It's pretty much the green counterspell. It's your green God's Willing that also gives +1/+1, and it is common. This is the tool a lot of decks have needed to fight back against the menace that has become Dimir Control. Cultivate is the ramp spell that you've been dreaming about. The dream of going Grazer into Cultivate into a 5-drop on turn 3 is a very strong one. If you choose your threats correctly, you could win pretty much off that alone. Fierce Empath is the tutor in that engine. You can set up your deck, set up your threats any way you want to, and know that you can look for them. If you select your rares to be your big finishing creatures, then this is just going to find them time and time again, while if necessary being a base to mutate onto, if that is where you're going. So a lot of very nice ideas definitely wedged into this little package. Then Reanimate. We have the spell, the 3-mana sorcery that brings back creatures with a total converted mana cost of 3, and then puts a menace and a death touch counter, I think, on one of them. This together with Lurrus is going to be a very strong and scary engine to put in those decks. So I would look out for Lurrus decks getting a resurgence because of this little guy. Getting some free 5/5 demons is nothing to scoff at, and this card is going to achieve it. Then Volcanic Geyser. Instant speed, red X spell that can go to any target. Planeswalker, player, creature, anything is possible. I'm covered in cat hair right now. This is the card that Temur Reclamation decks needed to break through in Gentry. The fact that you could only play 1 Expansion Explosion and 1 Electro Dominance really hampered what this deck can do. Now it has an uncommon to funnel all that energy into and go to face. A very scary card to see and shouldn't be underestimated. Hubbell Fiend is one of the tools that red-based sacrifice decks are getting, and they're getting quite a few actually. This is the more innocuous and probably the weakest of the bunch, but still a threat that keeps on growing, paired with a bit of disruption, is a very strong engine in Gentry that we've seen almost take over at some point just before Theros hit and changed the meta game. So I do think we'll see it in the hands of more aggressive-minded players. The more control-minded players will be super excited about Village Rites. We already had this with Altar's Reap, but it cost 2 mana. Now we're getting the same effect for 1 mana, really streamlining this deck. Malefic Scythe is another option for these kind of decks. They can really build this up easily, very quickly, and make it so that all those dorky creatures that you usually have in the deck, everything you use as fodder for your sacrifice engine, suddenly becomes a threat in of its own. So it makes your mid-game quite a bit better. You force your opponents to interact with the good cards in your deck, your Mayhem Devils and such, and at some point this will be there and look very scary. Twin Blade Assassins is there as an alternative option pretty much, for the deck. We've seen it as Junt already, we've seen it as Rockdose decks. Maybe this is going to be interesting enough to try and turn it into a Golgari build that aims more at card advantage than at aggressiveness and interruption. Of course, it's going to be just as good in Junt build as well, so let's see where that lands. Witch's Cauldron might be for that deck. Maybe Cat Oven is too heavy on the uncommons to make that worthwhile, and they'll start looking at Witch's Cauldron instead. Outside of that, I don't think the card is good enough, even though it is a pretty nice card to have. And then the last one we have is throwing it back to Rockdose. If you really want to go so far that you're giving up a bunch of the disruption for the most brute power that you can bring, this is essentially a 5/5 trample for 3 mana in that deck. So those people that want to go hyper aggressive with Fire Artisan and maybe some more very low to the ground creatures, this is definitely an option that you can take as well. And then next up, the ones that we will definitely see: shrines, every color of shrine. The blue one, black one, white one, green one, and red one. People will make shrine decks. They will be very scary. In a dedicated shrine deck, the black one and the blue one are probably the most interesting ones. But you need all the rest to round them off and go crazy with them. In that regard, the red one becomes interesting to have something to do with all the extra shrines that you have. Maybe we'll need sideboard cards that just get rid of all enchantments. I don't think this archetype will be oppressive, but I do think it will take some people off guard and get some people frustrated. Then token strategies get a new little buddy. Siege Striker as a very big double striker, making sure that your tokens are relevant even if they can't attack on their own. It misses trample or some sort of evasion to really be good, but this is the kind of build around me card that will just surprise people and kill them outright if they're not careful. Putting this into a Selesnya token aura shell seems like a very interesting way to go, because it'll be very easy to give him trample with Cetessan training. Could put him in a red shell and just give him haste instead for a surprise kill out of nowhere. There's plenty of options. And then Tight Skimmer leads us into blue-white flyers. They are going to be a archetype that focuses on the mid-range, that wants to put this pressure core and then bounce and counter a little bit, just long enough for 2-3 turns and win the game in that position. They'll have Tight Skimmer to draw some extra cards, and if you think that might be a little too much, it brings us to our next card. Let's go to Watcher of the Spheres first, because that is going to be the backbone, the core of this deck. It's a 2/2 flying in its own right. Creature spells with flying you cast costs 1 less, and whenever another creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it is going to put extra pressure on your opponent. Again, unfortunately, it's only a 2/2, which means that it does need protection against Cry of the Carnarium, which you can play Feat of Resistance, and you can play your own counter spells to interact with your opponent. So it's definitely an interesting card. And then one of those counter spells is Lofty Denial, which is a scary good counter spell for a deck that has these creatures in play. Just remember that if you only have one flying creature in play, you play this, they remove your flying creature in response, it is going to mean that it will check on resolution if your opponent needs to pay 1 or 4. So be very, very careful with that. And that wraps up our Gentry full set review. Of course, set 2021. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I got your creative juices flowing a little bit. A lot of other cards are interesting as well, but they serve more a support role than a real focal point, I think. If you think I missed one, put it in the comments. We can discuss it. And if you like this content and want me to do more like this, there's the little thumbs up. You can also subscribe. It's free. You'll get notified if you push the little bell icon thingy. And just, we'll see you when we see you. Have a good day.